the issue here is that we have a team member who's particularly sensitive to feedback around work performance.
Correct.
And you want to know how can we deliver feedback in a way that's not going to create some type of emotional upset with a person,
Exactly.
which is great because that's we don't want that. Um, so the first step in my mind is kind of very high level, is just how we approach the role of being a manager in the first place, which is really trying to come at it as being a coach. And we see our job as bringing out the best in each individual on our team and helping those individuals work together as a team to do great things. So this is the basic primary job of a leader. And I think the more that you get reminders of this and remind yourself of this, the more that there's this little micro actions that we do that start to display that to team members, where they really start to get the feeling that we really care about them and we want what's best for them. And that if we do give them feedback on something, it's not coming from a place of, we're judging them, or we're thinking about letting them go or something immediately, but that it's really like, hey, we see potential in these people, and that we want to help them be the best that they can be. So part of it is just kind of making that little by little more of who you are as a manager. So more of how you approach your thinking about, if you, like, for instance, if you have a decision to make, and it can affect your team members in some way, I think any decision that affects team members should be run through the filter of, is this going to have a positive impact on well-being and growth, or is it going to have a negative impact? And just little things like that can start to reframe some of the words we use, even our body language and how we present things. So that's just kind of a high level framework for creating the conditions where people are going to more and more, they're going to trust that when we are having a conversation with them, that we have their best interests in mind. And that creates a little bit of forgiveness if we don't use a word properly or something, and maybe we don't deliver something as softly as we could. There's kind of more of this trust. Now that's tricky right now because you're brand new. So in the short term, there's a couple things that I think can happen that can make it so that people feel not only they're not afraid of feedback, or it's not creating emotional upset, but that it's actually something that people are looking forward to. So one is, if you're going to give some feedback, is ideally to try to have the person that you're giving the feedback to, give them the opportunity to think through what happened. Because then it's much more about coaching, so, and just as a side note, I'm not naturally a good coach, but good coaches just ask a lot of questions and help people come up with their own solutions, versus kind of just telling people stuff and teaching people stuff. So, a good kind of process would be to think about, well, what questions can I ask of this team member to help them walk through what they've done, and see if they can identify areas where they could improve. And most of the time, people are going to do that. So then it takes it off of you, where you're not judging them. You're helping them kind of do an analysis of their work. And so if this becomes a regular habit, then people, especially if you do it when people have done everything right, and whenever you think that there is an issue that needs to be addressed, then people don't come to these conversations kind of worried that there's always something wrong. It just becomes part of a routine where there's these frequent conversations about, hey, so yesterday we were working on this, can you tell me how did it go from your point of view? What went really well? Was there anything that you think could go better? So taking a step back, I guess we don't need to take a step back, because this is actually fits in perfectly, I guess, right in this discussion chronologically. But so the idea is, if that becomes a regular known event, then again, it's people aren't going to look at it as like, oh, every time I get called in to have this type of discussion, I know something's wrong. especially if you're showing appreciation frequently for people doing things right. So let's say you get to the point where you've asked the team member to kind of go through, and they haven't identified anything that they think is an issue. And so then you might need to steer a little bit. You might need to say, hey, this is what about this portion of the work? Is there anything here that you see that you think went really well, or that you think could be improved in some way? And then if they still don't get it, then you could say, okay, well, great. So this is something that I see, and here's the magic part: is before you give the feedback from you, you can preface it with some variation of, so this is something I noticed, and I want to give you some feedback, and it's because I have really high expectations of you, and I know that you can meet them, and that's why I'm giving you this feedback. So then there's something psychological that goes on in the mind where people think like, oh, okay, they think I'm really good and they want me to reach my full potential, and so that's why I'm getting this feedback, not because I made a quote unquote mistake. And this is actually that particular phrase, or something very close to it, was conducted in a pretty decent sized research. I think it was in partnership with a couple of prestigious universities like Stanford and Harvard, or a couple others like that. And the researchers found that particular phrase so powerful that they called it magical feedback, or wise feedback, because it created such a positive response in people. So this could take a little bit more time, right? It takes some time to ask questions, kind of coaching questions, to help someone work through, go back and review their own work and identify what they could do, what they did really well, what they could grow on. But what happens is, not only are you creating the conditions where it's much less likely the person's going to have emotional upset, because they're the one generally kind of grading themselves, so to speak, but you're also developing a really important skill, which is you're helping them to develop the power of self-reflection, self-awareness. And little by little, what happens is, people start to catch these types of things on their own before they become a quote unquote mistake. So I think the more that things are framed like this, especially if possible to refrain from using the word mistake, then people don't see it as a negative. They don't see when they've made a quote unquote mistake, they don't see it as something negative. They see it as, oh, this is just one more opportunity for me to get better. And that can be a very, very powerful shift. I mean, this is one of the things where I think schools fail children, is that we create this huge stigma around making mistakes. Like, you should avoid mistakes at all costs. And of course, there are some mistakes that you want to avoid, right? Like things that could destroy an entire company or destroy relationships. But the point is, once it's happened, labeling it as a mistake doesn't really serve much of a purpose other than to make someone feel bad. So if possible, we can refrain using that word, and just, we're coaching someone through things that went well, things that they could grow on, without really kind of identifying a specific quote unquote mistake. And the reason that's so important is because, in addition to making sure that someone doesn't feel bad, that they actually receive feedback well, and that the feedback actually inspires them to grow and inspires them to want more feedback in the future, is that it also makes it so that we don't create a culture where people are afraid to try things that could really benefit the company. And I mean, my guess is, if you've got people on your team, they got there because they were interviewed, somebody thought they were smart enough to be on the team. And so, if we actually want people to be thinking about, well, what could I do that could improve how this process works, or what could I do to improve the way, that I interact with customers? And if people are afraid to make a mistake, then it's very unlikely that we're going to get innovation from frontline people, or that we're going to get creative ideas coming up from frontline people. So that's the overall process that I recommend, and those are the reasons why. And it's not something that's going to like happen overnight, but I think if you continue to practice with that, I think you'll see pretty cool results. And then even with that, if somebody's really sensitive, even if you did all of that perfectly, just the way that I described, you might still have someone that's kind of beating themselves up, where they get a little emotional. And then I think that's a good time to practice helping someone move through the emotion by asking, "Oh, it seems like you're a little upset because of this. Is that right?" And let them talk through it, practicing reflective listening. So you kind of name the emotion by reflecting back what you hear. And your job is to kind of let them just express how they feel. And once they feel heard, then you can kind of come back to, look, mistakes aren't the end of the world. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. And hopefully you don't even have to use the word mistake, but you could say areas where you haven't done as well as you would have liked to. That's not the end of the world. We're always growing, we're always learning. So I want these conversations to be about how we're going to get better as a team, how we're going to get better as individuals, and this is why I get feedback from you guys using People Thriver, right? I need feedback to continue to grow, knowing where I have room for growth.